Billionaire CEO sees a little girl playing the violin for $1. He pays, she plays, and tears begin to fall. Before we jump in, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Burlington's exclusive Sapphire restaurant, its elegant facade gleaming against the Vermont autumn sky. Inside, James Wright straightened his custom Italian tie as he surveyed the private dining area. At 38, the CEO of Wright Investments had already amassed more wealth than most would see in a lifetime, evidenced by his perfectly tailored suit and the casual way he ordered the restaurant's most expensive champagne without glancing at the price. Gentlemen, James raised his glass to the four investors seated around him, to another record quarter. The crystal glasses clinked as genuine smiles spread across faces that controlled billions in assets. These quarterly dinners had become tradition, a place where deals were sealed and fortunes made. Through the restaurant's large bay window, James noticed a small figure on the sidewalk. A young girl, no more than 12, stood beneath a street lamp with a battered violin tucked under her chin. Her coat, though clean, showed signs of wear, and her shoes appeared a size too small for her growing feet. Despite the chill, her fingers moved deftly across the strings, producing melodies that drifted faintly through the evening air. "Looks like we have some local entertainment tonight," James remarked with a smirk, gesturing toward the window. His associates chuckled, their attention momentarily drawn to the girl before returning to their discussion of market trends and potential acquisitions. Inside the restaurant's kitchen, Catherine Wilson wiped beads of sweat from her forehead as she scrubbed relentlessly at a stack of dinner plates. At 35, her hands bore calluses not from musical strings, but from years of harsh cleaning chemicals. Her once beautiful features remained striking, despite the exhaustion etched into them. High cheekbones, expressive eyes, and a graceful bearing that seemed at odds with her faded uniform. 10 years of working as the restaurant's cleaning staff had taught Catherine to be invisible. She moved efficiently through the space, careful to avoid drawing attention. Her gaze occasionally drifted toward the window where her daughter Lucy played, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. The old violin had been Catherine's only remaining connection to a life long abandoned, a life where music had once promised a very different future. When the kitchen door swung open, Catherine caught a glimpse of the private dining room where James and his associates sat. She recognized him immediately from magazine covers and local news. The financial prodigy, Burlington's most eligible bachelor, the man whose name adorned the very building where her modest apartment occupied a corner of the basement floor. Catherine checked her watch. Lucy would need to come inside soon. The evening was growing colder. As she slipped toward the back entrance to signal her daughter, she heard one of the waiters speaking to the manager. "The gentleman in the right party wants the violin girl to come inside," the waiter whispered. "Says he wants to add some entertainment to their evening." Catherine froze, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. She turned, her eyes widening with alarm as she saw the manager nodding and heading toward the front door. What could a man like James Wright possibly want with her Lucy? Catherine's heart raced as she watched the manager approach Lucy through the restaurant's window. Her daughter stood there, small violin clutched protectively against her chest, eyes wide with uncertainty. For a moment, Catherine was transported back to her own youth, standing on stages with spotlights blinding her vision, the weight of a much finer instrument in her hands. 10 years ago, Catherine Wilson had been among the most promising violinists at the New York Conservatory of Music. Her professors had spoken of international tours and prestigious orchestras. Her fingers had danced across strings with the kind of natural talent that made audiences hold their breath. Then she met Daniel Harrington, a charismatic young conductor whose ambition matched her own. Their whirlwind romance produced not only beautiful music but an unexpected pregnancy. When Catherine shared the news, Daniel's face had hardened with calculation. "This isn't in my plan," he'd said simply, before walking away forever. Left alone with impossible choices, Catherine had watched her carefully constructed future crumble. No more scholarships, no more recitals, no more dreams of Carnegie Hall. She could still recall the weight of her beloved Guarneri violin, a gift from her grandfather, as she carefully placed it in its case one final time before pawning it to cover medical bills. That day, Catherine had buried her identity as a musician alongside her broken heart. Yet music, like love, refuses to remain silent forever. In their tiny basement apartment, during precious hours between exhausting shifts, Catherine had discovered Lucy's natural affinity for melody. Using an old second-hand violin found at a charity shop, she began passing down the techniques her own teachers had imparted. "Keep your wrist loose," she would whisper, guiding Lucy's small hand. "Let the music breathe through you." Never once did Catherine mention her past achievements or the prestigious halls where she'd once performed. Those memories belonged to another life, one she had carefully walled away to protect herself from regret's sharp edges. Now, watching Lucy follow the manager into the restaurant, Catherine felt those walls beginning to crack. What if James Wright and his wealthy friends mocked her daughter's playing? Lucy had talent, extraordinary talent, but her technique remained unpolished without formal training. Catherine abandoned her dishwashing station and moved quietly toward the dining room, positioning herself behind a decorative column where she could intervene if necessary. From this vantage point, she could see James Wright's face clearly for the first time. His confident smile, the casual arrogance in his posture, the cold calculation in his eyes that reminded her too much of Daniel. "Let's see if that violin produces anything more than noise," James said, placing a $1 bill on the table with a smirk. "Entertain us, little street musician." The associates laughed. The manager looked uncomfortable. Catherine's hands balled into fists, but Lucy simply straightened her shoulders, raised her chin, and met James Wright's gaze without fear. Lucy stood in the center of the Sapphire restaurant, the worn violin feeling suddenly heavy in her small hands. The polished surfaces and crystal chandeliers were a stark contrast to the street corner where she usually played. 5 pairs of adult eyes scrutinized her, the investors amused, the manager uncomfortable, and James Wright with that challenging smirk that made her stomach tighten. "Well," James prompted, tapping the $1 bill on the table. "That's more than you'd make in an hour out there, isn't it?" One of the associates chuckled. "James, be reasonable. What can we expect from a street performer?" Lucy's fingers tightened around the neck of her violin. From her hidden position, Catherine watched in silent agony, torn between maternal protection and the knowledge that rushing forward would only humiliate her daughter further. She had raised Lucy to face challenges with dignity, but this felt cruel beyond measure. The restaurant had fallen quiet, other diners now watching the scene unfold. Lucy could feel their stares, some curious, others pitying. She thought about her mother's late-night lessons, how Catherine's eyes would light up when Lucy mastered a difficult passage, how her voice would soften when speaking of music's power to transcend circumstances. "Music doesn't care if you're rich or poor," Catherine had once whispered. "It only cares if you're honest." Lucy straightened her posture and met James Wright's gaze directly. Something flickered across his face, surprise at this small display of defiance. "What would you like to hear, sir?" Lucy asked, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. James leaned back, momentarily thrown by her composure. He had expected tears, perhaps, or stammering nervousness, not this calm dignity from a child who couldn't afford proper shoes. "Surprise me," he replied with a casual wave of his hand. "Something impressive if you can manage it." Lucy nodded once, positioning the old violin beneath her chin with practiced care. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage before making a decision that Catherine recognized immediately from her hiding place. "No, not that piece. It's too difficult, too revealing." But Lucy had already begun, her bow touching the strings to produce the first haunting notes of Bach's Chaconne, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the violin repertoire. A piece that Catherine had performed in her final recital at the conservatory, a piece she had never taught Lucy directly, but which her daughter must have absorbed through years of listening to her mother's rare moments of playing when she thought Lucy was asleep. Brenner, first few notes hung in the air like a challenge returned. James's smirk froze, then slowly faded as Lucy's small fingers began their impossible dance across the fingerboard. The old violin, despite its worn appearance, produced tones of surprising depth and clarity in Lucy's capable hands. Catherine pressed a hand to her mouth, tears filling her eyes as her daughter played the piece that had once defined her own musical identity. In Lucy's interpretation, she heard echoes of her own technique alongside something uniquely Lucy's, a raw, emotional honesty that Catherine had lost somewhere along her difficult journey. As the complex melody filled the restaurant, James Wright's expression transformed. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something vulnerable and unexpected. He was no longer seeing the shabby clothes or the scuffed shoes. He was hearing only the music, and it was breaking something open inside him. The final note of Bach's opening phrase hung in the air, crystalline and perfect. Lucy's bow moved with precision that belied her 12 years, drawing forth sounds that transformed the restaurant into a concert hall. Her small body swayed slightly with the music's emotional tide, eyes half closed in concentration. James Wright sat motionless, champagne forgotten. The complex harmonies Bach had woven 3 centuries ago were unfolding before him with unexpected emotional force. Lucy's playing lacked the technical perfection of professional violinists, yet possessed something rarer, authentic emotional depth that reached beyond technique. Catherine watched from her hiding place, a cocktail of pride and anxiety washing through her. She recognized the moments where Lucy's fingers faltered slightly on particularly difficult passages, but also saw how her daughter recovered with instinctive musicality that couldn't be taught. As the piece progressed, something extraordinary happened to James. Beneath his carefully constructed exterior of wealth and power, forgotten memories began stirring, of a small apartment where his mother worked double shifts, of foster homes after her death, of watching other children with loving parents through windows that might as well have been walls. A single tear tracked down his cheek, then another. James made no move to wipe them away, seemingly unaware of their existence as Lucy's music continued to dismantle defenses he'd spent decades constructing. Other diners had stopped eating. Waitstaff stood frozen mid-task. Even the kitchen fell, silent as the music permeated every corner of the restaurant. The wealthy investors at James's table exchanged uncomfortable glances, witnessing vulnerability in a man they'd previously considered impervious to emotion. One elderly woman among the regular diners was watching Lucy with particular intensity. Eleanor Parker, distinguished and elegant in her 70s, leaned forward in her chair, her experienced eyes noting every nuance of the girl's performance. As director of the prestigious Berkshire Academy of Music, she had heard thousands of aspiring musicians. Few had moved her as this child was doing now. Lucy approached the piece's most difficult section, a series of complex chords requiring precise finger placement. Catherine held her breath, knowing this passage had challenged even conservatory students. But Lucy navigated it with intuitive grace, perhaps not technically flawless, but emotionally honest in a way that transcended conventional expectations. As the final notes resonated through the hushed restaurant, Lucy lowered her violin. For 3 heartbeats, complete silence reigned. Then applause erupted, not polite dining room approval, but the thunderous appreciation of an audience profoundly moved. James remained motionless, tears now flowing freely down his face. When he finally looked up at Lucy, his expression had transformed entirely. Gone was the arrogant businessman who had summoned a street performer for amusement. In his place sat a man encountering something authentic in a world where everything had its price. "Who taught you?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the continuing applause. Lucy glanced toward Catherine's hiding place, somehow knowing exactly where her mother stood. "My mom," she answered simply. Eleanor Parker was already moving toward Lucy, her experienced eyes recognizing a once-in-a-generation talent. And Catherine, stepping from her hiding place at last, realized that her daughter's music had just changed everything, unlocking doors that had remained firmly closed for a decade. The single-dollar bill lay forgotten on the table between them. Theo. Applause gradually subsided, leaving an electric silence in its wake. Eleanor Parker moved purposefully through the restaurant, her elegant demeanor commanding attention. At 73, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had spent decades in the presence of extraordinary talent. "My dear," she said, addressing Lucy directly. "That was quite remarkable." She turned to Catherine, who now stood protectively, near her daughter, her cleaning uniform a stark contrast to Eleanor's tailored ensemble. "You must be very proud." Catherine nodded wordlessly, still processing the unexpected turn of events. 10 years of carefully constructed anonymity had just dissolved in a 5-minute performance. "I'm Eleanor Parker, director of the Berkshire Academy of Music," the older woman continued, extending a business card to Catherine. "I'd like to speak with you about your daughter's future." A murmur swept through the restaurant as diners recognized the name. The Berkshire Academy was legendary in music circles, a training ground for prodigies who eventually filled the ranks of world-class orchestras and concert halls. James Wright remained seated, his expression unreadable as he observed the interaction. The tears had dried on his cheeks, but something in his eyes remained altered. A window opened to emotions long suppressed. "Talents like this appear perhaps once in a generation," Eleanor continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime evaluating musical potential. "Your daughter has a natural gift that deserves nurturing at the highest level." Lucy looked up at her mother, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The violin still clutched in. Her hands suddenly seemed to represent more than just an instrument. It was a bridge to possibilities neither of them had dared imagine. "A full scholarship would be available, of course," Eleanor added gently, seeming to intuitively understand the economic realities that shaped their lives. "Everything: tuition, room and board, private instruction, performance opportunities." Catherine's composure finally broke, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll consider it," Eleanor replied. "Bring Lucy to campus next week. Let us show you what we can offer her." As Catherine struggled to find words, James Wright suddenly rose from his table. The movement drew all eyes to him, his imposing presence reasserting itself after the momentary vulnerability. "I'd like to speak with you as well," he said, his voice lacking its earlier condescension. "At your convenience." The way he looked at Lucy now had changed entirely, not with pity or amusement, but with something approaching reverence. It was the look of someone who had encountered something genuine in a world built on facades. Catherine instinctively moved, closer to Lucy, her protective instincts flaring. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said carefully to Eleanor before addressing James with cool civility. "Mr. Wright, I believe my daughter has earned more than $1 for her performance tonight." A flicker of shame crossed James's face as he glanced at the forgotten bill. "Indeed she has," he acknowledged, reaching for his wallet. "My apologies for the misunderstanding." Eleanor, sensing the tension, placed a gentle hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Think about my offer," she said. "Music like yours deserves to be heard by the world." As they prepared to leave, Lucy turned toward James one last time. "Thank you for listening, sir," she said simply, her inherent grace making the words sound sincere rather than obligatory. Catherine's gaze met James's across the room, a moment of silent communication between two people whose worlds had been irrevocably changed by a single piece of music. The morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of Catherine and Lucy's basement apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Catherine sat at their small kitchen table, Eleanor Parker's business card between her fingers as she contemplated the extraordinary events of the previous evening. Lucy practiced scales in the corner, her concentration unbroken by the previous night's excitement. The old violin sang under her touch, its voice grown familiar and dear over years of daily communion. A sharp knock at the door startled them both. Catherine opened the door to find James Wright standing in the hallway, looking oddly out of place in his designer suit. The narrow corridor barely contained his commanding presence. "Ms. Wilson," he said, his usual confidence temporarily undermined by uncertainty. "May I come in?" Catherine hesitated, then stepped aside. As James entered their modest home, his eyes took in everything. The carefully mended furniture, the bookshelves constructed from crates, the neatly organized space that spoke of dignity, preserved despite limited means. Lucy lowered her violin, watching the visitor with cautious curiosity. "I came to apologize," James began, "for my behavior last night, and to make an offer of my own." Catherine gestured toward their only other chair. "Please sit." James settled uncomfortably, seeming larger than the small apartment could reasonably accommodate. "Your daughter has extraordinary talent," he said directly. "I'd like to finance her musical education privately. The best teachers, a professional-grade instrument, performance opportunities with my connections." Catherine's expression remained guarded. "Ms. Parker already offered Lucy a scholarship to Berkshire Academy. My resources could provide more," James countered. "Private tutoring, international master classes, competitions abroad. Consider it an investment in her future." The word investment caught Catherine's attention. In her decade navigating poverty's narrow straits, she had learned to recognize when generosity carried hidden costs. "Why?" she asked simply. James shifted, his businessman's instinct for negotiation momentarily faltering. "What Lucy played last night. It awakened something I thought long dead. I haven't been moved like that in years, perhaps ever." Catherine studied his face, searching for the condescension she had witnessed the night before. Instead, she found something more complex, a genuine response to her daughter's music interwoven with a powerful man's need to control the narrative. "We appreciate your offer," Catherine said carefully, "but we need time to consider all options. Lucy's future isn't a competition between benefactors." James smiled tightly, unused to having his generosity questioned. "Of course. Take my card. Think about what I'm offering. Opportunities beyond what even Berkshire can provide." As he rose to leave, Lucy spoke for the first time. "Would I still be allowed to play my mom's violin sometimes, even with a new one?" The question's innocence caught James off guard. He glanced at the worn instrument, understanding for the first time its significance beyond monetary value. "Of course," he answered softly. After he departed, Catherine sank into the chair he had vacated. "What do you think, Lucy?" Her daughter's response carried wisdom beyond her 12 years. "The academy would teach me music, but Mr. Wright wants to own me." Catherine pulled Lucy into an embrace, recognizing the perceptiveness that mirrored her own. Both offers promised escape from financial struggle, but at what cost to the very soul of the music that had sustained them? The evening had settled into their small apartment, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. Catherine sat on the edge of Lucy's bed, gently stroking her daughter's hair as they discussed the remarkable events that had upended their quiet lives. A single table lamp cast a warm glow over them, creating an intimate circle of light in the darkness. "2 days ago we were worried about making rent," Catherine mused, her voice soft with wonder. "Now we're choosing between offers that could change your entire future." Lucy sat cross-legged on her bed, the old violin resting in her lap like a trusted friend. Her fingers absently traced the worn edges of the instrument as she considered the weight of the decisions before them. "I found something," Lucy said suddenly, reaching beneath her mattress to pull out a folded manila envelope. "Last summer when you were working double shifts at the cafe." Catherine's brow furrowed as Lucy carefully emptied the contents onto the bedspread. Yellowed newspaper clippings, concert programs, and a faded photograph of a young woman in an elegant black dress, holding a violin on the stage of a grand concert hall. "Why didn't you tell me you were famous?" Lucy asked, her eyes fixed on her mother's face. Catherine's breath caught as she lifted one of the clippings. "Where did you find these?" "In that old trunk in the storage closet. The lock broke when I accidentally knocked it over." Lucy's voice held no accusation, only curiosity. "The woman in these pictures. She looks so happy, so free." Catherine traced her finger over the photograph, remembering the weight of the Guarneri violin in her hands, the buzz of anticipation before walking on stage, the applause washing over her like a wave. "That was another lifetime," she whispered. But it was your life, Lucy persisted. You were going to play with orchestras all over the world. The articles say you were brilliant. Catherine smiled sadly. I was good, but I made choices. Because of me? The question hung in the air, laden with implications. Because of love, Catherine corrected gently. I chose you, Lucy. Not just once, but every day since. She gathered the clippings with trembling hands. I never regretted that choice. Not for a moment. They sat in silence for a time, the weight of the past settling around them like a familiar blanket. Tell me about my father, Lucy finally said. Is he in these clippings too? Catherine hesitated, then nodded slowly. Daniel Harrington. He was a conductor, brilliant, charismatic, destined for greatness. We were young, passionate about music, certain we would conquer the world together. What happened? He made a different choice. Catherine's voice remained neutral, carefully stripped of bitterness through years of practiced restraint. His career was just taking off. A child wasn't part of his plan. Does he know about me? Lucy's question was quiet, but direct. No. Catherine met her daughter's gaze steadily. That was my choice too. I didn't want you to grow up feeling like you were unwanted by him. You were always wanted, Lucy. Always loved. Lucy processed this information with remarkable composure. After a moment of thought, she returned to the more immediate question. What should we do about the offers? Berkshire Academy or Mr. Wright? Catherine appreciated her daughter's practical nature, so like her own. What do you think? The Academy has other students. A community, Lucy reasoned. With Mr. Wright, I'd be alone, just his project. She searched for the right words. Yesterday at the restaurant, he looked at me differently after I played. Not like I was just some poor kid anymore. I noticed that too, Catherine agreed. Music can do that, reveal our humanity to each other. But I still don't trust him, Lucy continued with surprising insight. It's like he wants to own the feeling my music gave him. Ms. Parker just wants to teach me. Catherine nodded, both proud and slightly unsettled by her daughter's perceptiveness. The Academy would provide structure, discipline, peers, a complete education. Mr. Wright's offer is more personalized, but also more controlling. I think I want to go to Berkshire, Lucy said after a thoughtful pause. But I'm scared too. I've never been away from you. Catherine gathered her daughter close, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair. You'll never truly be away from me. The music connects us no matter the distance. Lucy nestled against her mother's shoulder. Will you start playing again? Your real violin is gone, but you could use mine sometimes. The question pierced Catherine's heart with unexpected force. For 10 years, she had kept her musical self locked away, allowing herself only brief, secretive moments with Lucy's violin when the pain of silence became too much to bear. Maybe, she whispered. One step at a time. As Lucy drifted toward sleep, Catherine remained sitting on the edge of the bed, her mind navigating the currents of possibility that had suddenly opened before them. Tomorrow she would call Eleanor Parker and accept the Academy's offer. She would also need to speak with James Wright, a conversation she anticipated with equal parts gratitude and caution. Music had found its way back into their lives in an unexpected manner, through the doorway of Lucy's natural talent. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Catherine was determined that her daughter's journey would not mirror her own abrupt departure from that world. Lucy would have what Catherine had lost, the chance to discover how far her gift might take her. The Wright Investments building towered over downtown Burlington like a gleaming monument to success. Catherine and Lucy stood in the marble-floored lobby, their reflections bouncing off polished surfaces in every direction. Lucy clutched her violin case tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. Are you sure about this? Catherine asked softly. We've already decided on Berkshire. Lucy nodded. We should tell him in person. It's more respectful. Catherine smiled at her daughter's sense of propriety. another quality she'd tried to instill despite their difficult circumstances. They had called Eleanor Parker that morning to accept the Academy's offer, a conversation filled with warmth and practical arrangements for Lucy's upcoming transition. Now they stood waiting for the elevator that would carry them to James Wright's penthouse office on the 52nd floor. The executive suite was a study in understated power, floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of Lake Champlain, minimalist furniture in leather and chrome, abstract art pieces that Catherine recognized as originals by renowned artists. James rose from behind an imposing desk when his assistant showed them in. "Catherine, Lucy," he greeted them, his manner markedly different from both the condescending businessman at the restaurant and the awkward visitor to their apartment. Here in his domain, he projected confident authority tempered with newfound respect. "Please sit down." Catherine noted the use of their first names, an attempt at establishing familiarity perhaps. They sat in chairs that probably cost more than their entire apartment's furnishings. "I've been thinking about our conversation," James began, "and I want to modify my offer." Catherine started to speak, but Lucy surprised her by opening her violin case. "May I play something first?" she asked James directly. "Something I composed." Interest flickered across his face. "Of course." Lucy positioned the old violin with practiced ease, closed her eyes briefly, then began to play. The melody that emerged was unlike Bach's structured complexity. This was something entirely original, weaving together classical techniques with simpler themes that Catherine recognized as fragments of lullabies she used to hum when Lucy was small. The piece told a story without words, of longing, of struggle, of small moments of beauty found in difficult circumstances. It spoke of resilience in a language that transcended economic barriers, filling the sterile office with something profoundly human. When Lucy finished, James remained silent for a long moment, visibly moved. "Why do you play music, Lucy?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucy met his gaze directly. "Because it's the only thing that can't be bought or sold," she answered simply. "It can only be felt." The words hung in the air between them, a gentle rebuke from a 12-year-old, to a man who had built his life around the premise that everything had its price. Catherine cleared her throat. "Mr. Wright, we've decided to accept the Berkshire Academy's offer. We're grateful for your interest, but we believe the Academy will provide Lucy with the community and structure she needs." James nodded slowly, something like respect dawning in his expression. "I understand. And I think you've made the right choice." It was the last response Catherine had expected. "You do?" "Lucy's music deserves to develop naturally, not under my control." He spoke the last word with self-awareness that surprised her. "But my offer of support remains open, unconditionally." As they left the building, Catherine realized that Lucy's music had accomplished something remarkable. It had reached beyond their immediate needs to touch the humanity in a man who had perhaps forgotten his own. The autumn air held a crisp promise of winter as Catherine drove their aging sedan through the tree-lined streets toward home. Beside her, Lucy stared out the window, the violin case balanced carefully on her lap, processing the unexpected outcome of their meeting with James Wright. "I didn't think he'd understand," Lucy finally said, breaking the contemplative silence between them. "He seemed different in his office than he was at the restaurant." Catherine glanced at her daughter, perpetually amazed by her perceptiveness. "People are complex, Lucy. Sometimes they surprise us." She navigated a turn, carefully avoiding a pothole she knew by heart after years of driving this route. "I think your music reached something in him that's been buried for a long time. Do you think I made the right choice? Picking Berkshire instead of his offer?" Catherine considered the question seriously, respecting her daughter's need for honest reassurance. "I do. The Academy will give you something Mr. Wright couldn't. Peers, community, structure. Music isn't meant to be developed in isolation." Later, that evening, Catherine called Eleanor Parker to finalize their acceptance. The conversation was warm yet practical, discussing semester schedules, residential arrangements, curriculum expectations. and the scholarship details that would make this improbable journey possible. She'll need a proper instrument, Eleanor mentioned toward the end of their call. The academy has several fine violins students can use, but for a talent like Lucy's, her current violin has sentimental value, Catherine explained, feeling a protective instinct toward the modest instrument that had carried both their musical souls. It was mine before it was hers. Of course, Eleanor responded with characteristic sensitivity. The emotional connection to an instrument is important, but perhaps we can arrange for a professional assessment, see if it needs any restoration or adjustments to support her development. The following morning brought an unexpected envelope delivered to their door, thick cream-colored paper bearing the Right Investments letterhead. Catherine opened it with cautious curiosity. Inside was a brief handwritten note from James Wright, along with legal documents establishing a discretionary trust in Lucy's name. The note was direct and surprisingly humble. Catherine and Lucy, I respect your decision and believe it's the right one. Music like Lucy's deserves the proper environment to flourish. The enclosed documents establish a modest emergency fund you can access if needed during her time at Berkshire. No conditions, no expectations. Consider it an apology for my initial behavior and an investment in music that moved me when nothing else could. With respect, James Wright. Catherine reviewed the documents carefully, her years of navigating hardship having taught her to examine any offer for hidden strings. To her surprise, the arrangement was exactly as described, a simple trust fund available for emergencies with no control mechanisms or requirements attached. When she showed the letter to Lucy, her daughter's response was characteristically thoughtful. He's learning, she said simply. As October progressed, preparations for Lucy's January enrollment at Berkshire intensified. There were forms to complete, medical examinations to schedule, and the practical logistics of preparing a 12-year-old for her first significant time away from home. Eleanor became a frequent visitor, bringing information packets, arranging a tour of the campus, and answering the countless questions that emerged. During one such visit, she noticed Catherine's hands, the calloused fingertips and distinctive muscle memory in her movements that revealed her musical past. You were a violinist yourself, Eleanor observed. Not as a question, but a certainty. Catherine nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. A lifetime ago. The technical foundation Lucy displays. It's extraordinary for someone without formal training. You must have been her teacher. I taught her what I could, Catherine acknowledged, in the hours between shifts. Eleanor studied her with newfound understanding. Would you mind if I asked where you studied? Your technique, even visible in Lucy's playing, suggests classical training. Catherine hesitated, then decided that hiding her past served no purpose anymore. New York Conservatory. I left during my final year. Recognition dawned in Eleanor's eyes. Catherine Wilson, she said slowly. I remember now. You performed Mendelssohn's Concerto with the student orchestra. The faculty spoke of your promise. Catherine looked away, unprepared for the rush of emotions that came with being remembered. That was another person, another life. The music never leaves us, Eleanor said gently. Even when we leave it. As she headed toward the door, Eleanor paused. Catherine, the academy is always looking for part-time staff. Administration, student support, various positions. If you wanted to be closer to Lucy during this transition, perhaps we could find something suitable. The offer hung in the air, not charity but possibility. A chance to remain connected to Lucy's journey while perhaps beginning to reconnect with the world she had abandoned a decade ago. I'll consider it, Catherine replied, the words feeling like the first tentative steps on a long-forgotten path. That night, after Lucy had gone to bed, Catherine sat alone in their small living room. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to really look at the old photographs and clippings Lucy had discovered, concrete evidence of the promising young violinist she had once been, before life had demanded different choices. The path forward was becoming clear. Lucy would have her chance at Berkshire, with Catherine finding a way to remain connected to her daughter's journey. while perhaps beginning to heal the musical part of herself that had been silenced for too long. The night before Lucy's departure for Berkshire Academy, a sense of quiet anticipation filled their small apartment. Catherine had spent the day packing her daughter's modest belongings, carefully folding each item with the knowledge that this transition marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Lucy sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by the few mementos they had accumulated over the years. Catherine watched her from the doorway, struck by how grown-up her daughter looked in that moment, poised between childhood and something new, her face thoughtful in the warm lamplight. "I think it's time," Catherine said softly, drawing Lucy's attention. She crossed to the small closet in the hallway and pulled out a heavy wooden trunk, the same one Lucy had discovered the previous summer. This time Catherine produced a small key from her pocket and unlocked it properly. "I've kept this closed for too long," she explained, lifting the lid to reveal layers of carefully preserved memories. Lucy moved closer, her eyes wide with curiosity. Catherine began to remove items one by one, each a piece of the life she had left behind. First came a leather portfolio containing concert programs, New York Philharmonic, Carnegie Recital Hall, international youth competitions in Vienna and Prague. Lucy traced the printed name with wonder, Catherine Wilson, violin. "You played in all these places?" she asked, her voice hushed with awe. Catherine nodded, continuing to unpack the trunk. She pulled out a velvet-lined case, much finer than the one that housed Lucy's instrument. When she opened it, both gasped, not at the presence of a violin, but at its absence. The custom-fitted interior remained perfectly preserved, the instrument-shaped void a poignant reminder of what had been sacrificed. "My Guarneri," Catherine explained, her fingers tracing the empty contours. "I sold it to cover medical bills when you were born. It was worth more than I could earn in years." Lucy touched the empty case. "You gave up everything." "I gained everything," Catherine corrected gently. "Different treasures, equally precious." Deeper in the trunk lay photographs, Catherine with renowned teachers, with orchestra members, with fellow students. In each image, she radiated the confident joy of someone fully immersed in their calling. Among them was a particular photo that Catherine hesitated before removing, a handsome young man with intense eyes and a conductor's baton, his arm around a younger Catherine. "Daniel Harrington," Catherine said, her voice steady. "Your father." Lucy accepted the photograph with trembling hands, studying the face of the man she had never known. "He looks like me around the eyes," she observed quietly. "He does," Catherine agreed. "He was brilliant, charismatic, destined for greatness. Where is he now?" Catherine drew a deep breath. "London, last I heard. He's the principal conductor of the Royal Symphony Orchestra. His career flourished exactly as he'd hoped." "Does he know about me?" Lucy's question was direct, without accusation. "No," Catherine answered honestly. "It was my choice not to tell him. He made it clear that a child wasn't part of his plan, and I didn't want you to begin life feeling unwanted by him." She reached for her daughter's hand. "I never wanted you to think you were an obligation or an obstacle. You were always my choice, Lucy, my joy." Lucy absorbed this information with remarkable composure. "Should I hate him?" Catherine shook her head firmly. "No. Hate binds you to people in unhealthy ways. Understanding is better. He was young, ambitious, focused on a singular path. Not everyone has the capacity to change course when life presents unexpected turns." From the bottom of the trunk, Catherine removed a small velvet pouch. Opening it revealed a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a musical note. "My grandmother gave this to me when I was accepted to the conservatory," she explained, the silver catching the light as she held it up. "She said music was the language of souls finding their way home. I'd like you to have it at Berkshire." Catherine fastened the necklace around Lucy's neck, the pendant settling against her collarbone. "Something to remind you that wherever music takes you, there's always a connection back to where you began." Lucy's fingers touched the pendant, her eyes filling with tears. "What if I'm not good enough?" The other students have probably been training their whole lives with professional teachers and expensive instruments. Catherine cupped her daughter's face between her palms. You bring something more valuable than technical training. You bring the truth in your playing. That's the difference people heard at the restaurant, not just notes, but honest emotion. Trust that gift, Lucy. It can't be taught. They spent hours exploring the trunk's contents. Letters from teachers, reviews from early performances, theory books with Catherine's margin notes. Each item revealed another facet of the musical heritage that Lucy had unknowingly inherited. Will you ever play again? Lucy asked as they carefully repacked the trunk, this time without locking away the memories. Catherine considered the question, feeling something shift inside her, a door long closed beginning to open. Maybe, she answered. One step at a time. For now, it's your turn to discover where music will take you. As they prepared for bed, Catherine wrote a letter for Lucy to read during tomorrow's journey. Words of encouragement, love, and wisdom that could accompany her daughter into this new chapter. Into the envelope, she slipped the silver necklace, completing the circle that connected their musical journeys across generations. The morning of Lucy's departure arrived with a pale winter sun illuminating the frost-covered windows of their apartment. Catherine had barely slept, her mind filled with practical concerns and emotional anticipation. She moved quietly through their small kitchen, preparing a special breakfast while Lucy finished the last of her packing. Eleanor Parker had arranged for Lucy to travel to the academy with another new student from a nearby town, their transportation scheduled to arrive in just a few hours. The practical arrangements were all in place. Dormitory assignment, class schedule, orientation details. Yet Catherine couldn't shake the feeling of standing on the edge of a precipice, about to watch her daughter step into empty air and trust she would fly. Lucy emerged from her bedroom carrying her small suitcase and the violin case that had become an extension of herself. She wore the silver musical note pendant around her neck, her fingers occasionally reaching to touch it as if drawing comfort from its presence. I think I have everything, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. They ate breakfast together, their conversation drifting between practical reminders and shared memories. Neither mentioned the impending separation directly, as if by unspoken agreement they had decided to focus on the opportunity rather than the parting. A knock at the door startled them both. Catherine opened it to find Eleanor Parker standing there, elegant as always in her winter coat. But more surprising was the tall figure behind her, James Wright, looking slightly uncomfortable yet determined. I hope we're not intruding, Eleanor said warmly. I wanted to check that everything was in order for Lucy's journey. Catherine invited them in, noting the wrapped package James carried. He stood somewhat awkwardly in their small living space, his powerful presence softened by a hint of humility that hadn't been there when they first met. I brought something for Lucy, he explained, offering the package. Not the expensive violin I mentioned before. I understand now why your current instrument matters. This is something different. Lucy carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a beautifully crafted violin case. Not ostentatious, but made of fine leather with subtle craftsmanship that spoke of quality and durability. Inside, the custom-fitted interior was designed to hold her existing violin perfectly, with compartments for rosin, extra strings, and sheet music. Your violin deserves proper protection for its journey, James said simply. The craftsman added special padding to support its particular dimensions. The thoughtfulness of the gift, recognizing the importance of Lucy's connection to her instrument rather than trying to replace it, spoke volumes about how James had been changed by their brief but meaningful interactions. As the time for departure drew near, Catherine handed Lucy an envelope. For the journey, she said softly. Open it when you're on your way. Their goodbye at the bus station was both brief and profound, a fierce embrace filled with unspoken emotions, promises to call, reassurances that Christmas break would arrive before they knew it. Eleanor discreetly guided Lucy toward the waiting vehicle while James stood respectfully apart, allowing mother and daughter their private moment. As the bus pulled away, Catherine felt a hollow sensation expand in her chest, pride and grief intermingling in equal measure. She had spent 12 years defining herself primarily as Lucy's mother. Now she would need to rediscover who Catherine Wilson might become. As the bus carrying Lucy toward Berkshire Academy wound its way through the Vermont countryside, she finally opened the envelope her mother had given her. Inside was a handwritten letter, the careful penmanship so familiar it made her heart ache with sudden homesickness. My dearest Lucy, by the time you read this, you'll be on your way to a new chapter of your life, one filled with opportunities I could only dream of for you. The distance between us today feels enormous, but please know that no physical separation can weaken the connection we share through music and love. You carry with you not just your own remarkable talent, but also a legacy of music that flows through generations of our family. The pendant around your neck belonged to my grandmother, who gave it to me when I began my own musical journey. Now it continues with you, a small reminder that you are never truly alone. There will be difficult days ahead. You'll meet students who have had advantages you haven't. Years of formal training, expensive instruments, families with musical connections. Remember that what makes your playing special isn't technical perfection, but the emotional truth you bring to every note. That cannot be taught or bought. It comes from living authentically and embracing both joy and hardship as part of life's complex melody. I've never told you this before, but the night you were born, I hummed Bach's air to you for hours as you slept in my arms. Even then, just hours old, you seemed to respond to the music, your tiny face relaxing into peace with each phrase. Perhaps that was the moment your own musical journey began. When you play, don't think about impressing others or competing for recognition. Play for the pure joy of bringing beauty into the world. Play for yourself, play for me, play for anyone who needs to be reminded that some things in life transcend our daily struggles. Music has that power to lift us beyond our circumstances, if only for a moment. I am so proud of you, Lucy, not just for your talent, but for your kindness, your perception, your resilience. These qualities will serve you well at Berkshire and throughout your life. Trust yourself, trust your gift, and know that whatever happens, you always have a home in my heart. All my love, Mom. Tucked into the folds of the letter was the silver musical note pendant that Catherine had shown her the night before. Lucy carefully fastened it around her neck, her fingers lingering on the cool silver as she watched the familiar landscape of her childhood recede through the bus window. The other Berkshire-bound student, a boy about her age with a cello case beside him, glanced over curiously. "First semester?" he asked. Lucy nodded, suddenly shy. "Me too," he said with a nervous smile. "I'm Thomas." "Lucy," she replied, her hand instinctively touching the pendant for reassurance. "Do you think it'll be hard? Berkshire, I mean." Thomas considered the question seriously. "Probably. My teacher says all worthwhile things are." He gestured toward her violin case. "What do you play?" Lucy thought about her mother's letter, about truth in music, about authenticity. "Bach, mostly," she answered. "And my own compositions. Sometimes. You compose?" Thomas looked impressed. Lucy nodded, feeling a small spark of confidence. Perhaps she did have something valuable to offer at Berkshire after all. As the bus continued its journey toward her new life, Lucy carefully refolded her mother's letter and placed it in her violin case alongside her most treasured sheet music. The anxiety that had been building inside her didn't disappear, but it transformed into something more manageable. A quiet determination to honor both the opportunities ahead and the love that had made them possible. Miles behind her, Catherine stood alone in their apartment, surrounded by the quiet that Lucy's absence left behind. She looked toward the old trunk that no longer held locked-away memories, then toward the telephone that would connect her to Eleanor Parker and the possibility of a position at Berkshire. After a decade of looking backward, Catherine found herself cautiously facing forward, considering what might yet be possible. The Berkshire Academy of Music stood like a vision from another era, a sprawling campus of ivy-covered buildings, manicured grounds, and the constant melody of instruments drifting, through open windows. Lucy clutched her violin case as she followed the orientation guide through marble hallways, adorned with portraits of famous alumni and distinguished faculty members. Everything about Berkshire intimidated her. The polished students who carried themselves with practiced confidence, the expensive instruments being unpacked in dormitory rooms, the casual conversations about summer master classes in Vienna and Prague. Lucy's worn sneakers and simple clothing marked her immediately as different. Her dormitory room was small but comfortable, designed for focused practice rather than socializing. Her roommate, Sophia Bennett, arrived with matching luggage sets and a violin case that Lucy immediately recognized as containing an instrument worth more than everything her mother owned. "You're on scholarship, right?" Sophia asked bluntly, not unkindly but with the directness of someone who had never worried about affording anything. Lucy nodded, unpacking her few possessions with deliberate care. "Full scholarship." "You must be really good then," Sophia responded, her initial assessment softening. "Berkshire doesn't give those to just anyone." The first week passed in a blur of placement auditions, theory assessments, and orientation sessions. Lucy's technical gaps became immediately apparent when contrasted with peers who had studied with private instructors since early childhood. Dr. Harrison, the stern violin professor assigned as her primary instructor, didn't mince words during their first session. "Your intonation needs refinement. Your bowing technique is inconsistent and your understanding of theory is rudimentary at best," he said, peering at her over wire-rimmed glasses. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened. "But when you play, Bach, something extraordinary happens. You have what many of my technically perfect students lack, an innate musicality that cannot be taught." He tapped his pencil against the music stand thoughtfully. "You play with your heart, but now you must learn to play with your mind as well. It won't be easy." Lucy nodded, fighting back tears of both relief and anxiety. "I'll work harder than anyone." "I believe you will," Dr. Harrison replied. "Let's begin with proper posture." The days quickly established a demanding rhythm: theory classes in the morning, private instruction, ensemble rehearsals, mandatory practice hours, and evening studies. Lucy often practiced until her fingers ached, determined to close the technical gap between herself and classmates who had enjoyed years of privilege. Thomas, the cellist from the bus, became an unexpected ally. They met regularly in the practice rooms where he patiently helped her navigate music theory concepts that others had mastered years earlier. "Just think of it like a language," when he explained during one late-night session. "The rules might seem arbitrary at first, but they're just tools to help the music speak more clearly." One evening, while struggling with a particularly difficult passage, Lucy finally broke down in tears of frustration. "Maybe I don't belong here," she whispered. "Everyone else seems to understand everything so easily." Thomas set his cello aside. "That's not true. You hear things in music that most of us miss completely. The rest is just mechanics. Important but learnable. You can't teach someone to feel music the way you do." For the first time since arriving at Berkshire, Lucy allowed herself to believe that perhaps her different path wasn't a disadvantage, after all, but simply a different kind of preparation for the journey ahead. The winter months at Berkshire Academy melted into spring, bringing with them remarkable changes for Lucy. The technically challenging pieces that had once seemed impossible now yielded to her persistent practice. Dr. Harrison noted her progress with rare words of praise during their sessions, his critical eye softening as Lucy's dedication began to produce tangible results. "Your Bach interpretations have always been exceptional," he remarked one afternoon. "But now your technique is beginning to catch up with your musicality. That's the combination that creates truly memorable performances." Lucy treasured these small victories, carefully documenting them in her weekly phone calls with Catherine. Those calls became anchors in both their lives. 30 precious minutes every Sunday evening when they bridged the physical distance between them with shared stories and mutual encouragement. Catherine had accepted Eleanor Parker's offer of employment, working in student services at Berkshire 3 days a week. Though she didn't directly intersect with Lucy's academic schedule, her presence on campus provided comfort to them both. Occasionally, they would meet for quick lunches between Catherine's shifts and Lucy's classes, brief interludes that strengthened their evolving relationship as Lucy grew increasingly independent. "I can hear how much you've grown," Catherine observed during one such lunch, after Lucy demonstrated a difficult passage she'd mastered. "Not just technically, but in your confidence." Lucy's friendship with Thomas deepened as the semester progressed. His methodical approach to music complemented her intuitive style, and they often practiced together in the quieter corners of the campus. Thomas's family background couldn't have been more different from Lucy's. Generations of musicians, a father who conducted for a regional symphony, a home filled with instruments and musical history. Yet he never made Lucy feel inferior for her unconventional path. "My father says most music schools produce perfect technicians who never move audiences," he told her once. "He'd say you have the harder part already figured out." James Wright remained a surprising peripheral presence in their lives. True to his word, he had established the trust fund without conditions, but his involvement extended beyond financial support. Occasionally, he would send articles about composers or historical performances that he thought might interest Lucy. Catherine received these small gestures with cautious appreciation, recognizing the genuine transformation in the man who had once mocked her daughter's street performance. As spring semester's end approached, Lucy focused increasingly on developing an original composition for the winter concert, the Academy's most prestigious student showcase. Her piece, which she tentatively titled "Tears for $1, wove together elements of Bach with melodic themes from her own experience. The composition told a story without words, of barriers crossed, of music as a universal language, of beauty, emerging from unexpected places. "It needs to be honest," Lucy explained to Thomas as she worked through difficult sections. "Not just technically correct, but true." Dr. Harrison supervised her composition work with uncharacteristic patience, recognizing that Lucy's creative process differed from his more structured approach. "This piece has something many student compositions lack," he admitted, after reviewing her progress. "It has an authentic voice." When Catherine visited for Parents' Weekend in late spring, she was stunned by Lucy's transformation. Her daughter stood taller, moved with greater confidence, and played with a technical proficiency that complemented her natural expressiveness. After Lucy's student recital, Catherine found herself surrounded by faculty members eager to discuss her daughter's unique talent. "Lucy mentioned you were her first teacher," Dr. Harrison said, studying Catherine with newfound respect. "You laid an extraordinary foundation." Catherine smiled, feeling a complex mixture of pride and wistfulness. "I gave her what I could. Berkshire has given her what I couldn't." As the academic year drew to a close, Lucy received an unexpected letter from Eleanor Parker. The Academy director had arranged for several exceptional students to attend a prestigious summer workshop, and Lucy's name headed the list. The opportunity would provide intensive training with master musicians from around the world, further accelerating her development. Lucy approached Catherine with the letter, her expression torn, between excitement and concern. "It means I'd only be home for 2 weeks before the workshop starts." Catherine embraced her daughter. "This is exactly why you're at Berkshire, for opportunities like this. Home will always be waiting for you." That night, Lucy worked late in the practice rooms, refining her winter concert composition. As the melody took shape beneath her fingers, she realized it had evolved into something more complex than she'd initially envisioned. Not just a personal story, but a musical exploration of how unexpected connections can transform lives. James, Wright's face in the restaurant, her mother's sacrifices, Thomas's friendship, Dr. Harrison's grudging respect. All these elements wove together in a composition that honored both where she had come from and where she might go. The piece ended with a haunting refrain that echoed the simple melody Catherine used to hum as a lullaby, a musical acknowledgement that no matter how far her talent might take her, Lucy carried her beginnings with her always. The prestigious winter concert at Berkshire Academy arrived on a clear December evening, the campus transformed by twinkling lights and fresh snow. Inside the historic Chamberlain Hall, excitement built as families, faculty, and notable music patrons filled The elegant auditorium to capacity. Critics from major publications discreetly took their seats, programs in hand, pens ready to evaluate the Academy's most promising talents. Backstage, Lucy stood in her simple blue dress, carefully tuning her violin. The instrument, though still modest compared to others in the Academy, had been lovingly restored by a master luthier James had recommended, not replaced, but respected for its history, and enhanced to better support Lucy's growing abilities. The silver musical note pendant from her mother gleamed at her throat, a tangible reminder of the journey that had brought her here. In the first row of the audience sat Catherine, elegant in a borrowed dress, her eyes bright with anticipation. Beside her sat Eleanor Parker, whose belief in Lucy had opened this door. And unexpectedly, in the seat next to them, sat James Wright, who had arrived without fanfare, his presence a quiet acknowledgement of his part in the unfolding story. Lucy was scheduled to perform last, a position of honor that reflected the faculty's high estimation of her composition. As she waited, she thought about the incredible transformation of her life in just 1 year. From playing for spare change outside the Sapphire restaurant to standing backstage at one of the most prestigious music academies in the country, to perform her original work before an audience of discriminating musicians and critics. Thomas found her in a quiet moment before the final call. "Nervous?" he asked, his own cello performance having concluded earlier to enthusiastic applause. Lucy smiled. "Not about playing, just about telling the truth." "Your truth is what makes your music special," he reminded her. When the moment finally arrived, Lucy walked onto the stage with measured steps, her chin held high despite the fluttering in her stomach. Under the spotlight, she could see Catherine clearly in the front row, her mother's eyes filled with tears and pride. Beside her, Eleanor watched with the satisfaction of a mentor whose faith had been justified. James sat with uncharacteristic humility, a man transformed by the unexpected power of music to break through carefully constructed walls. Lucy positioned her violin, took a deep breath, and began to play her composition, Tears for a Dollar. The piece opened with a haunting echo of Bach that gradually transformed into something uniquely her own, a musical narrative that spoke of barriers crossed, of unexpected connections, of beauty emerging from struggle. As she played, Lucy poured everything into the music, her mother's sacrifices, her own journey from outsider to belonging, the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this stage. The melody soared through the hall, at times achingly vulnerable, at others triumphantly resilient. In the audience, Catherine found herself transported back to her own days as a promising young violinist, recognizing in her daughter's playing echoes of what might have been alongside celebration of what was. As the piece approached its climax, Catherine's gaze met James's across the small distance between their seats, a moment of silent acknowledgement of the unlikely roles they had each played in Lucy's journey. Lucy concluded her composition with a gentle refrain that echoed the lullabies Catherine had hummed years ago, a musical coming full circle that left the audience in breathless silence before they erupted into a standing ovation. Critics who had heard countless prodigies found themselves moved by something beyond technical prowess, the authentic voice of a young artist with something genuine to communicate. At the reception following the concert, a journalist approached Lucy. "Your piece was extraordinary," she said. "Who would you say has been your greatest influence?" Lucy, surrounded by faculty members and patrons eager to congratulate her, answered without hesitation. "My first teacher was Catherine Wilson. She cleaned floors at night but taught me that true music doesn't come from the instrument. It comes from the soul." Catherine, overhearing these words, felt a weight lifting that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for 10 years. The music had never left her. It had simply transformed, flowing through her daughter in ways she could never have imagined when she packed away her own dreams. As snow began to fall outside the windows of Chamberlain Hall, Lucy found herself standing between the 3 adults who had shaped her improbable journey. Catherine with her unwavering love and sacrifice, Eleanor with her recognition of potential and provision of opportunity, and James with his unexpected evolution from arrogance to humble support. "What happens next?" James asked, genuinely curious about the path that might unfold before this remarkable young musician. Lucy touched the pendant at her throat, a small smile playing at her lips. More music, she answered simply. Always more music. And in that moment, surrounded by possibility, Lucy Wilson realized that music had never been about escaping her circumstances. It had been about transforming them, note by note, measure by measure, into something beautiful that could touch hearts and change lives, including her own.